Hi everybody, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. I am here today at ASP Corporate Headquarters Worldwide with Professor David Yamane from Wake Forest University, and you might know him from Gun Curious and from Light Over Heat. If you don't know him from Light Over Heat, there is a link in the description to his channel and you should subscribe. And we got to attend a seminar, you were here all weekend at a seminar, on guns in society, which was kind of interesting, and I want to talk to him about it.
The Black Arch Protoss holster is the only hybrid-like holster that I can recommend. It does everything that a holster needs to do and is great for strong side carry. They're part of our holster consortium. Go check them out at the link in the description.
So Professor, have you been on the channel before? I know we've talked, you've been...
I was interviewed by Carrie at the NRA meeting right when Gun Curious came out.
That's right. Okay, so you might have seen David.
Thankfully not on the other channel.
Yeah, never on the bigger channel. That's the goal. Get through your whole life and never appear on the Big ASP channel. We met in 2017. Yep. After, if you followed ASP for a long time, Graham Wood wrote an article on active self-protection and me in particular in The Atlantic in 2017 that invited the curiosity of a man who is a professor of sociology and is studying the sociology of firearms.
That's right.
And so tell me about the event that you were here for this weekend.
Yeah, so it was at the Center for the Study of Guns in Society, which is a brand new interdisciplinary center that was founded by Jennifer Carlson, who's sort of the dean of gun studies in the United States. And so this is the inaugural symposium, brought together scholars who study guns from across disciplines from around the United States to hang out for a day, talk about our work. But there were also two public events, one on a documentary called The Tennessee 11, and then the other one on a book called Murder USA, which you were able to attend.
Yeah, so let's think for a second. Wait a minute. The Center for the Study of Guns in Society. Interestingly, I had never heard of it. And it's here in my town. It literally was downtown Phoenix that we were in at ASU, the downtown campus at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. And I've taught seminars down there to journalism students, not firearms related, but I was like, wait, there's this thing going on? Can I show up? And they were like, no, there's a couple of public seminars you can show up to, kid. Otherwise, don't let the door hit you where the Lord split you.
Yeah.
But we got together to attend a discussion of the book Murder Town USA, which actually was pretty fascinating. I thought it was. And listen, here's my thing for you. I will say just at the beginning that some ideas in that seminar made me kind of cringe. It made me uncomfortable, right? Some things that were said I disagree with. Some things made me think. Some things I thought were really interesting, but I kind of like that. Like if the only stuff you're ever exposing yourself to ideologically is stuff you already agree with, I feel like there's no chance to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that, one of the things about the seminar was that it did bring together people from different disciplines. There's a lot of shared understanding because they're all sort of academics. They all tend to be liberal, but they do approach guns from lots of different particular angles, from the perspective of economics, inequality, production, consumption. And so, I think it was an event that, it challenged me as well, to think about, I think actually interesting, not just as a scholar, but as a, human being and as a member of society.
Yeah.
So.
And interestingly enough, there was actually a fan of ASP who was there, and he presented there and is doing research work there. And then he is also, I don't know about a representative or just a member of the National African American Gun Association, NAGA. And so I thought that was kind of cool, and seeing somebody there that it was weird to be recognized in that kind of, academic, geeker environment, but was kind of fun. So let's talk a little bit about the seminar that we attended, the symposium. Now they recorded it for their podcast. I'm not positive that podcast is going to be live before this video posts. I don't know. I'll go look it up. If it is, go look in the description. If it's live, I promise you the link will be in the description. I thought it was pretty fascinating because it was a discussion of, they called it Murder Town USA, and that was a play on what CNN, I think? Was it CNN?
Might have been Newsweek.
Newsweek.
Yeah.
Called Wilmington, Delaware. Now, of course, Would you think that Wilmington, Delaware was a particularly dangerous town? You wouldn't, right? But they had a murder rate that had escalated to 55 per 100,000, which isn't quite in current times, sadly, the most dangerous town in America, but for a town under 100,000, it was.
Yeah, and it's 10 times the national average.
Literally 10 times the national average. And so they set about to dive in there, which I thought was a really interesting concept with, street participatory action research. And tell me what you think of that model.
Yeah, so, I think one of the interesting things about participatory action research in general is that it sort of breaks down that subject-object divide that we often have. Like the researcher is the objective observer, and we look at some other people, we draw our conclusions. This is, I think...
Without influencing or impacting, right?
Yeah.
We just want to see, what are you doing, not me influencing you.
Yeah, or really them influencing us.
Yeah.
That there's a very strong divide there. This is a kind of basic scientific model of objectivity. But over time, people have come to think, especially when you're studying human beings, maybe there needs to be more sensitivity to the lived experience of those people, and that maybe they have something to teach you, and that you can actually approach the issue as collaborators, where the research subjects actually participants. So that's the participatory part. And then the action part is that it's not really just meant to come up with some findings for finding's sakes, but you really want to have actionable outcomes.
Yeah.
So it violates standard ways of approaching scholarship in a couple different ways, but I think a lot of people are thinking these people are living in very desperate circumstances,
Yeah.
and just observing them and writing a report that goes nowhere, maybe that's not the best use of time and resources.
Yeah, because if you go, okay, we're just going to observe this terrible living situation you're in, and then we're going to go report back to the other eggheads, and then hopefully some of the eggheads have the ear of somebody who can do something, and then maybe they'll help you. And I think some of these folks that are doing PAR, participatory action research, are going, we can be part of that help right now as we do the research. Pretty fascinating that they took hundreds of applications, then took on 15 kind of researchers with them, trained them. It was I will tell you that the level of work those people did to get to be a part of this team was impressive. 3 to 5 days a week, 3 or 4 hour training sessions for 18 weeks. When you think about that, that's a part-time job for months to get to the place where they're like, okay, now you're ready to go out into the community. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And then, this is where it's still social scientific research in the sense that it's systematic data gathering, it's systematic analysis. So it's not just like, hey, whatever, we're just going to go hang out on the streets for a while and then we'll say stuff. So, it violates some expectations in certain ways, but it is still very systematic research. And I thought it was really interesting, the guy Wolf, who was one of the people who was a leader among the trainers, among the scholars, but he only had a master's degree, and he actually had a lot more experience in jail, as we learned.
Yes. Yeah, he had done a whole lot of time, like 17 years.
17 years.
For a nonviolent drug crime. And then he recently, here's where the world freaks out. He was one of those who just received a pardon from President Biden the day before he left office. Seemed a solid individual who was doing good work in his community. I don't know a whole lot else about it, but it seemed like he was doing really good research there and connected well in that community.
Yeah. Well, that's where he comes from, that community. He talked at the start about how his son was murdered.
Yeah.
Right, and his first reaction was, we're going to murder back. And then his wife intervened and said, hey, look, if you just keep perpetuating that cycle, all we're going to have is dead bodies. And so, I think that was a big turning point for him. And then, again, part of that street PAR idea is that if you get people who are part of that community on your team, they have built-in credibility. Right. You can find out things that if I walk into that community and start asking questions, I'm not going to get very far.
You're not going to get very far. But he could, because he is part of that community and he's known there, he has the credibility. And I thought that was a really fascinating part. I do think it was kind of funny, academics love to use euphemisms, right? So we don't want to talk about gang affiliated people. So there were street identified persons.
Street identified persons.
Street identified persons. So that was a euphemism that I learned. Now, I'm not against euphemisms. If you're on the big channel, people are like, John, why do you call it the asphalt temperature challenge? It's a workaround for the bots, kids. It's me working around the sensors. Is how that is, and using a different term. It's a euphemism, right? And so, okay, and also I think gangs in a lot of places are getting more diffuse and harder to identify, and so it's, okay, they're identified with their neighborhood.
Yeah. So it's, it's not pure political correctness, but, I think that there is a lot of sensitivity to how do terms that we might use sort of push those people away. So I think, street identified is both meant to soften it, but also recognize the fact that, the old days of very hierarchical and very structured gang activity doesn't exist, and that it's really it is people who identify with the streets, with their, people in their community, who have many divisions between them.
Many divisions between them. It was a really interesting thing, too, because he talked about there in Wilmington, Delaware, was it in Wilmington? You'll have to remind me of this, that he was talking about how what the outside world looking in, there was a murder between a couple of guys that was really big, and everybody looked at, wait a minute, it's, is it the black community that's having a problem? And within the community, though, they were like, no, this is just Jamaicans having Jamaican problems.
Right. Yeah.
And so they don't identify as black, white, Latino as much as they identify as Jamaican or Puerto Rican or Haitian or those things, and so it's definitely a more granular identity than what I think sometimes we give that idea outside of those communities.
Yeah.
I also think there was a couple things that were fascinating to me. That and you've heard me say this on the big channel, that this number one identifier of where these incredible high crime areas are is abject poverty. Now, I got to ask a question afterwards to one of the panelists about the combination of high crime and high population density, to which she was like, what you're talking about there is like a combined, like a compound disenfranchisement, and that's a pretty big deal. So that was really an interesting idea, but it's no big shock that high poverty areas are where you're going to find violent crime, right? That's where that's going to be. But also the amount, most of these people, the vast majority of these people living in high crime areas are not violent people, but they have been exposed to violence, and the saturation, something like 55% of people that they interviewed either had a friend or a family member who had been killed with firearms. And that's a mind-boggling number.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that I don't hear it as much within the gun community, but there was a very famous person in the gun community who, in talking about some of these high crime inner city neighborhoods, was like, just build a fence around it and let them shoot each other, to the ground. And that really ignores the fact that almost all of the people in these communities are innocent victims of violence. Very small numbers of people are responsible for all of that violence. And so, being an indirect victim of violence can ruin your life in terms of PTSD. You do less well in school. You don't, eat as well. So, we should, if you're concerned about people, you should be concerned about people in those communities.
Yeah. Well, and that trauma, when it doesn't get properly dealt with, leads to post-traumatic stress, which can lead to disordered behavior, PTSD, which maladaptive behaviors show up from that. And that cycle has been going on for literally generations and generations and generations. And how do we break that? Well, I think it's a really complicated issue. The other thing, hopefully their podcast comes out and I'll be able to link it for you guys. An interesting bit to me was they didn't talk about gun control at all in this issue. They were like, look, I thought it was kind of funny in the question and answer that somebody was like, well, wait a minute, how come we're not regulating guns as consumer products? These are consumer products, and so the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and I'm like, okay, but that issue's been decided long ago. But of course, sometimes researchers and people in that community don't realize that. But he said, friend, the people in these communities aren't walking into gun stores and buying guns.
Yeah. She was trying to sort of say, well, aren't the firearms manufacturers in part responsible for this? Because they did talk a lot about economic inequality, like, isn't this one of the drivers of that? And the guy, he was very confused. I think he had that moment where he didn't really understand the question, and then was trying to process it. But his real answer was, these are not legal firearms that people are buying, and even if they were, that it's not the guns that are fundamentally the problem. He said these are violent environments, and these people engage in violence as part of their adaptation to those environments. And if they don't have the guns, they're going to kill each other some other way.
Yeah. So there was, in his, I think, solution, he's like, look, we got to dig under to the systemic issues, to the underlying cause. An interesting bit there that he said, wait a minute, crime is in some sense, he said, we don't approve of it, but it's a marker of resilience. It's a way that these people are responding to the adversity that they have to try to succeed. And that can be a marker of resilience in the community as much as it's what we wouldn't approve of, which you're like, wait, no, no. But I mean, okay. And so it's kind of hard, it was like that odd thing. I didn't want to accept that, but I understood where he was coming from.
Yeah, and he also talked about how they do surveys with these people, and they express very high levels of life satisfaction.
Yeah.
They feel like they're making contributions. They're happy. Which we may want to question, like, how truncated is their understanding of what a happy and good life is. But it's, again, this is one of the things that you get when you actually engage in research on the ground, as opposed to just looking at it from the outside. And I think it's useful.
Well, and a lot of these street identified persons, a high majority of them, when they were asked, are you useful to have around? They said, yes, I'm always useful to have around. Their self-image of themselves is as a good person.
Yeah.
And of course, then that the value of the community, now not the entire community, but maybe just their street community, involves, sometimes violence is the answer, and I will do violence in order to enforce the rules around me.
Yeah.
And that's part of me being a good person. Everybody does what makes sense to them in their mind, right? And so I just thought it was fascinating, and it made me think about, I want to buy their book. Okay, so that book, Murder Town USA, I'm not going to put a link to it in the description because the hardback on Amazon is like $150. You can get the softback for $40. I guess I might put the link in the description, but so then that way you don't have to search for it. But $40? It's not obviously a book that is aimed at the general audience.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting because the whole model of Street Par was really to have that action part. Yep. And if your main findings are being distributed in a format that people aren't going to be able to access, I think that's a sort of real issue. And it is a reality that publishing books costs money and publishers need to make money.
Yeah.
But and I don't know whether they had a choice in those matters. Yeah. But in retrospect, it's hard to ask anybody to pay $40 for a book. And
I think I'm gonna, but oof,
yeah,
that's a big ask.
Yeah.
And I'm an avid reader, and still $40 is a big ask on a book, when I'm trying to read 20 or 30 books a year,
Yeah. Well, you can ask your public library to see if they'll order it.
That's
always a good workaround.
Why don't I ever think of that? My wife is such an avid library user, and I just don't ever go that route. But
yeah. Or if there's another book that you're interested in, like, for example, about guns called Gun Curious, you can ask your library to order that one too.
You shouldn't, though. You should buy a copy because Professor Yamane needs to eat. And that book is cheap. And it's quite valuable.
$20. And can I actually, I don't mean to do too much self-promotion here, but there's a sense in which the work that I did that led to that book was a form of participatory action research. Maybe not the action part so much, because I wasn't really trying to change anything. But, though I entered into the study of gun culture in part as an active participant in it, as well as a scholarly observer. And there were things that I learned that I could only learn by participating.
Yeah.
So I think, this is where that very strict notion of the observer just standing back from the fray, to understand how something really works. Sometimes you got to get in there and do it.
And of course, I'm going to put the link to David's blog and to his YouTube channel. You should subscribe. His stuff, especially the stuff on his guns seminar at Wake Forest University, Guns and Society, is really, really fascinating. Watching these students participate in that and what happens, and I think you should definitely check it out if you haven't. My takeaways from this seminar, and that I would encourage you to. One was that it's good to get around people whose ideas of things not only aren't the same as yours, but maybe contradict yours. And I know you, as a sociologist, this is part and trade of how societies function best, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's in this day and age, it's so easy for us to stay in our bubbles and echo chambers, and there's just no growth there. You know, there's no growth for ourselves. There's no development for us culturally or societally. So, yeah, and it's not to say you have to agree. You know, I don't have to go and say, oh, now I see the light and I agree with everything you say. But you know, you have to encounter ideas different than yours to grow.
Well, and I think that recognizing that. At this seminar, there were very intelligent, well-meaning, earnest humans whose ideas about these issues were definitely different than mine. And so when you meet real people and you get to interact with them on a real basis, they even had food. So sitting sometimes and having a meal, you know, and breaking bread together brings us closer and helps us to understand, even if we still disagree. It humanizes everyone. And that breaks us out of the modern American civic religion. Right now, the tribal camps are, you know, we're functionally Shiites and Sunnis here. I don't mean that's no denigration of my Muslim friends, but you know, we can't get along at all because they're the other religion. And I think we can do better than that and break out of that. And I think we need to, because we're going to be in trouble otherwise, and we already are in trouble. So go to stuff like this. You see something like that, and go. And I'm going to tell you, man, I won several rounds of my favorite game. And if you're friends with me on Facebook, you know, several thousand are. My favorite game is Can You Shut the Up? And that is just sit, and I have ideas here, but I'm going to put a clamp on my mouth and just shut up and listen, and then hear, and I can go home and I can process it with my trusted friends, with my trusted loved ones, rather than I'm going to have an argument with somebody here. And I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. I mean, approach these things, even if you are going to, you know, you should listen, but if you intend to speak, treat it as a conversation rather than a debate, right? Because a debate is someone wins and someone loses. A conversation is about mutual understanding. Yeah. And in a situation like this, you know, I think that it's not really about who wins or loses. And if you try to win a conversation, you're that guy, and you don't want to be the guy who's always going around trying to win a conversation.
You don't want to be that guy. And a great value for me too, of course, got to spend a little bit of time with a friend, and also Laura, my wife, went with us, and we got to spend that time together, and then we had a fascinating conversation on the drive home and got to engage that. Now, you know, my wife is probably left to center politically, but also, you know, she knows what her husband does for a living, and she's a firearms owner and supporter of Second Amendment rights. So, you know, that there was an interesting discussion, like, hey, what'd you think of that, dear? And how did that work for you? And back and forth. So these kinds of things can be really valuable. I'm going to be looking into the Center for the Study of Guns in Society. It's right here in my town. And it was kind of interesting that one of the panel members at the very end, I was talking to her about that issue of population density. And she's like, oh, tell me how you're involved in this. And so I was like, oh, okay, I run this large YouTube channel, a couple of them, and we do firearms education as well as, you know, empty-handed skills, but then also I do expert witness work. And she instantly just like grabbed a hold of me. Like, I need to talk about that a little bit because I've been asked to do some of that and I don't know how to, you know, when to do that and those things. So that was kind of fun. Anyways, thank you so much for coming into town and for inviting me to join you at this symposium.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to come to the symposium and being, I think, really open-minded enough to do that. And I'd say, you know, I know probably most of the people who watch the channel are gun owners in some sense, and you know, these are also opportunities for gun owners to model what a good responsible gun owner looks like to people who may not have met anybody like that.
Yeah, good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent. That is what we want to be at all times, right? And it was kind of fun. The last bit that I'll leave you with is that they did have a Phoenix PD officer. I think he was Phoenix. He might have been ASU PD. on site, just hanging around. Nicest guy ever. And when we were on our way out, I went over, shook his hand, hey, thanks for working today. And he was like, hey, great to see you. He was like the friendliest guy ever. And we had a nice day and nobody gave me a hard time. And it was a wonderful time, even though we were on a campus of a college in the United States of America.
Scary.
Insane stuff. Guys, hope you have a great day. Go do something uncomfortable this week, would you?